I am living at the Villa Borghese. There is not a crumb of dirt anywhere, nor a chair misplaced. We are all alone here, and we are dead. Last night, Boris discovered that he was lousy. I had to shave his armpits, and even then the itching did not stop. How can one get lousy in a beautiful place like this? But no matter. We might never have known each other so intimately, Boris and I, had it not been for the lice. Boris has just given me a summary of his views. He is a weather prophet. The weather will continue bad, he says. There will be more calamities, more death, more despair. Not the slightest indication of a change anywhere. The cancer of time is eating us away. Our heroes have killed themselves or are killing themselves. The hero, then, is not time, but timelessness. We must get in step, a lockstep, toward the prison of death. There is no escape. The weather will not change. These are the opening lines to Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, and upon reading them, I knew I was going to be hooked throughout the novel. Henry Miller is an expat writer who wrote Tropic of Cancer in 1934, but had been writing it since 4 years prior, as he was disillusioned with the US, moved to France to become a writer, and ultimately did not get what he expected. This is, of course, in the wake of the famous expat writers like Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway, who did a very similar thing. And you can call Tropic of Cancer many things, as it is in the self-banned book. It is vulgar, it is depraved, but you cannot call it dishonest, no matter what. Miller follows a stream of consciousness writing style, much akin to Ulysses. In fact, he references Ulysses in this novel, and actually, funny enough, the recognitions we talked about earlier on this year references Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. But what Tropic of Cancer does, and what Henry Miller does that distinguishes itself from the other great expat literature, is both in its characters and in its setting, mainly in its setting. Even though books written by Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, and the other expat writers can be depraved and can have very cynical themes, typically the setting itself is written as being beautiful. I mean, you can take The Sun Also Rises. The characters in that book are very emotionally and psychologically depraved, but the setting itself is portrayed in a very beautiful fashion. That is not the case in Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, and I'll read a section of that as followed. How a man can wander about all day on an empty belly and even get an erection once in a while is one of those mysteries which are too easily explained by the anatomist of the soul. On a Sunday afternoon, when the shutters are down and the proletariat possesses the street in a kind of dumb torpor, there are certain thoroughfares which remind one of nothing less than big, cankerous cock laid open longitudinally. And it is just these highways of the Rue Saint-Denis, for instance, or the Faubourg du Temple, which attract one irresistible, much as in the old days around Union Square or the upper reaches of the Bowery. One was drawn to the dime museums, where in the show windows there was displayed wax reproductions of various organs of the body, eaten away by syphilis and other venereal diseases. The city sprouts out like a huge organism, diseased in every part. The beautiful thoroughfares only a little less repulsive because they have been drained of their pus. At the Cité, somewhere near the Place du Combat, I pause a few minutes to drink in the full squalor of the scene. It is a rectangular court, like many, another which one glimpses through the low passageways that flank the old arteries of Paris. In the middle of the court is a clump of decrepit buildings, which have so rotted away that they have collapsed on one another and formed a sort of intestinal embrace. The ground is uneven, the flagging slippery with slime, a sort of human dump heap which has been filled in with cinders and dry garbage. The sun is setting fast, the colors die, they shift from purple to dried blood, from nacre to bister, from cool, dead grays to pigeon shit. Here and there, a lopsided monster stands in the windows, blinking like an owl. Henry Miller isn't looking to flatter you or to impress you with lavish, rich, and beautiful setting descriptions. These descriptions are detailed and they are beautiful to, or I should say lavish to a certain extent, but they are hardly beautiful. Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer focuses mainly on the deterioration of society. Here, Paris is portrayed as an organism. It is not as architecture. It is not. They're not objects. They are they are living things, that being organisms, and they are dying. They have syphilitic rot, as he describes, and just overall decay throughout years. It is a beast to a certain extent, and I find these descriptions, although haunting and unnerving and, filling me with a sense of dread and despair, there is a beauty to them that cannot be denied, and Henry Miller's perspective is very unique in this regard. But Paris isn't the only thing that is dying. It is also human decency and humanity as its own. And whereas most apocalyptic stories would sort of be in despair to the end, as we're looking at the end of humanity and at the end of civilization, Henry Miller looks at this end and embraces it and decides to change with the times. He is not afraid to go to dark places. In fact, his disillusionment probably with his time in France in real life probably helped change his way, because in this kind of world, you either adapt or you die, and Henry Miller is more than willing to adapt to the more primal urges that come out during the apocalypse that his current setting, in his current world, and his current lifestyle is pushing him towards, and he embraces it full-heartedly. Somehow, the realization that nothing was to be hoped for had a salutary effect on me. For weeks and months, for years, in fact, all my life I had been looking forward to something happening, some extrinsic event that would alter my life, and now, suddenly, inspired by the absolute hopelessness of everything, I felt relieved, felt as though a great burden had been lifted from my shoulders. At dawn, I parted company with the young Hindu. After touching him for a few francs, enough for a room, walking toward Montparnasse, I decided to let myself drift with the tide, to make not the least resistance to fate, no matter in what form it presented itself. At this very moment, in the quiet dawn of a new day, was not the earth giddy with crime and distress? Had one single element of man's nature been altered, vitally, fundamentally altered by the incessant march of history, by what he calls the better part of his nature? Man has been betrayed, that is all. At the extreme limits of his spiritual being, man finds himself again naked as a savage. When he finds God, as it were, he has been picked clean. He is a skeleton. One must burrow into the life again in order to put on flesh. The word must become flesh. The soul thirsts, and whatever crumb my eye fastens, I will pounce and devour. If to live in the paramount thing, then I will live, even if I must become a cannibal. Heretofore, I have been trying to save my precious hide, trying to preserve the few pieces of meat that hid my bones. I am done with that. I have reached the limits of endurance. My back is to the wall. I can retreat no further. As far as history goes, I am dead. If there is something beyond, I shall have to bounce back. I have found God, but he is insufficient. Henry Miller's supposed writing style is sitting on a typewriter and invoking the muse, waving his fingers over the keyboard, the typing board, and letting things go. I think I heard that somewhere. I hope that is true. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. But this prose rings of that. He says earlier on in this book, actually, that he will make no edits to this book, that it's going to be as honest as possible, and it shows here. This man is a deep thinker. You may not agree. In fact, I don't really agree with a lot of things that he says. And to a certain extent, he's playing a character, or he's arguing a certain philosophy, which is to adapt no matter what, because the world is not going to change to your liking. You might as well just turn to a cannibal, because it is the end of times. God, he's crazy. But the stream of consciousness writing style just comes out so clearly in the prose here. You understand where he's coming from, despite the fact that he's saying horrible things, and he does horrible things later on in this book, but you understand the necessity of it, at least from his perspective, because he's a disillusioned man. He went to Paris and ultimately tried to write, but could not find success, at least at this point in his life, and going back to the idea that he didn't want to make any edits, he stayed true to that, because this book was banned in the US due to its content, and he would not flinch. He would remain vigilant in his ideas for this book, no matter what the consequences were, and he would ultimately not sacrifice his artistic integrity over making a profit. And speaking of art, Henry Miller, of course, has a lot to say about what is art, what constitutes an artist, and how artists differ from the rest of humanity, and I'll read that section as followed. Side by side with the human race, there runs another race of beings, the inhuman ones, the race of artists who, goaded by unknown impulses, take the lifeless mass of humanity, and by the fever and ferment with which they imbue, it turns the soggy dough into bread, and the bread into wine, and the wine into song. One of the dead composed of the inert slag, they breed a song that contaminates. I see this other race of individuals ransacking the universe, turning everything upside down, their feet always moving in blood and tears, their hands always empty, always clutching and grasping for the beyond, for the God out of reach, slaying everything within reach in order to quiet the monster that gnaws at their vitals. I see that when they tear their hair with the effort to comprehend, to seize this forever unattainable, I see that when they bellow like crazed beasts and rip and gore, I see that that there is no other path to pursue. A man who belongs to this race must stand on the high place with gibberish in his mouth and rip out his entrails. It is right and just, because he must. And anything that falls short of this frightening spectacle, anything less shuddering, less terrifying, less mad, less intoxicating, less contaminating, is not art. The rest is counterfeit. The rest is human. The rest belongs to life and lifelessness. And so perhaps sardonically, he basically says that it's, from what I gather, that it's the artist's job to receive these messages from the unknown or from themselves or from whatever. It's not made clear, and purposely not made clear because they don't really know where artists get their ideas from, but to constantly think about life and their existence and their place in the world and humanity's place in the world, and to constantly question and ponder these existential and nihilistic threats and concepts. No matter how much it destroys them on the inside, they must do this in order to create true art, because if they are not being their true selves, and they're not pushing the art form forward, they're not getting into the deepness of the human experience, then ultimately they are not producing true art, and they are ultimately producing something that is human and not something that is from the artist. Very unique perspective, and it's abundantly clear in Tropic of Cancer. This is a brutally honest novel. Henry Miller talks a lot about the human condition, about the nature of art, goes into these ideas that I've never really considered before, and I could just quote this book endlessly, but the point of this video is to get you to read it so that you can enjoy this book and potentially get similar experiences that I did out of it, because if you like the books that I talked about previously on my channel, such as The Recognitions, Ulysses, read this book because it is incredible. I want you to enjoy the experience as well, because I never really heard of this book until my friend Mark recommended it to me, and I haven't looked back since, because having no idea what to expect with this book, and then reading that first couple lines, which I read at the beginning of the video, it just blew my mind from there, and then continued to wow me from there on. And it's also a pretty good follow-up piece to the Recognitions as well. They have very similar themes, very similar settings, struggling artists living in France. So if you like the Recognitions, I recommend Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. It's a lot shorter, and although they address similar themes, they don't necessarily have similar perspectives. And as I said earlier, Gaddis clearly read Tropic of Cancer because he references it in the Recognitions, and was clearly inspired by it as well. So yes, I hope that I somewhat encourage you to read this book, because it had a very profound effect on me. I'm thinking of doing a full video at some point on expat writers. It won't be anytime soon, because I have things coming up in the immediate future, but it's definitely something on the horizon, because this book definitely gave me a further perspective on what expat writing can be, and I'm going to be reading more Henry Miller at some point, probably Tropic of Capricorn, my next book that I read by him, although I do not own it. If I find it, I will buy it. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you read this book, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below, or if I motivated you to read this book, I'd like to know that as well, maybe. If I did, I hope I was convincing enough. If I'm not convincing enough, just read a couple sections of it and you'll be convinced pretty easily. Yeah, so check out my friend's Colors Wonderland, who just did his ultimate bookshelf tour, and check out Drunzo as well, who has not made a video for a long time, but check him out anyways. And thank you for making it this far, and goodbye.